How do we understand who Jesus is? How do we picture him? Most folks have a pretty good idea of their concept of Jesus, even if they cannot fully articulate it. As I've said over the last few days, different Christians view Jesus somewhat differently. They all alike see the same Jesus, but their portraits of Jesus all emphasize different things about him. The problem of Christians talking to each other is they assume everyone sees the same Jesus they do. They assume their portrait of Jesus is the only true portrait of Jesus. As H. Richard Niebuhr showed in his book Christ and Culture, it is just true that different people and different groups in the church have and do see Jesus somewhat differently. He identified 5 typical ways the church has pictured Jesus. So far, we've seen 2 extremes. Those who picture Jesus as a strict lawgiver who demands perfect and total obedience to his stringent laws, and so picture a church that must be totally separate from the world. And we've seen those who picture Jesus as a great moral teacher or philosopher who expresses the best and highest values of human culture. These 2 extremes deal with the tension between our loyalty to Christ and our loyalties to the world quite differently. The Christ against culture folks simply divide the 2 and call Christians out of the world. The Christ of culture folks see little tension between Christ and culture and essentially make Jesus a servant of culture by envisioning him as the one who expresses the best and highest of human culture. But most of the church has and does live between these 2 extremes. Most of the church holds on to the tension between Christ and culture and works to explain how we live in both the kingdom and in the world. For the rest of this week, we'll look at 3 different portraits of Jesus in this great middle ground where most of us live. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, April 18th, 2024. As I describe the portraits of Jesus in the 3 median types, you'll easily recognize them. You are quite familiar with the terminology and ideas and may indeed have a hard time distinguishing between them. That's because all 3 of these typical portraits fall within the bounds of what we broadly think of as Orthodox Christianity. The first of these groups Niebuhr calls the synthesists. Their way of understanding the relationship between Christ and culture is to essentially place them on 2 separate but related planes, the realm of heaven and the realm of earth, with a Christ who has a foot firmly planted in each realm. You are no doubt familiar with the way we talk in the church about the 2 natures of Christ. He is fully God and fully man, 2 natures united in one person. He's not half God, half man, but 100% God and 100% human. And while this is conceptually difficult for many of us to understand, it is how the church has typically expressed the mystery of Christ's dual nature. He is seen as the Son of the living God, the creator of all that is. He is understood to be the Lord over all things. And while this seems normal to us, it actually has some profound implications. It differentiates the church of the center from the extremes, and especially from the Christ against culture extreme. It does this by understanding that as creator, God does not reject culture because culture is part of God's creation. As Lord, Christ is not only Lord over the church, but he's Lord over all things in heaven and on earth. He is Lord not only over our spiritual lives, he is Lord over every aspect of life, from our economic life, to our political life, to our social life, and everything in between. So, unlike the radical answer, the Christ against culture answer, this portrait of Jesus shows us a Jesus who is concerned with and involved in the whole of human life without separating so-called religious life from so-called secular life. But unlike the Christ of culture, this portrait doesn't view Jesus as a sort of handmaid to culture, just showing us what the highest moral teachings might be. And if all this sounds familiar, it's because this is part of what you've heard out of this and many other pulpits for a long, long time. But this is not the only part of the picture you know. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at a similar but somewhat different portrait. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.